Aria Rosewood pressed herself against the cold marble wall of the corporate building's lobby, her petite frame barely visible behind the massive potted plant she'd chosen as her hiding spot. At 5'2" and naturally soft-spoken, she'd perfected the art of becoming invisible over her 23 years of life. Today, however, invisibility felt more like a survival mechanism than a choice. "He's coming," whispered Jessica, the receptionist, her voice carrying across the pristine lobby. "Mr. Blackthorne just pulled up. Everyone looked busy." Aria's heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched the stack of quarterly reports she was supposed to deliver to the executive floor. She'd been working at Blackthorne Industries for 6 months as a junior analyst, and despite her exceptional work, she'd managed to avoid any direct contact with the company's enigmatic CEO. Marcus Blackthorne was a legend in the business world, brilliant, ruthless, and intimidatingly powerful. At 35, he'd built his empire from nothing, and his presence commanded respect from seasoned executives twice his age. The employees whispered about him in hushed tones, sharing stories of his piercing green eyes that could see through any deception, and his voice that could make grown men tremble. The revolving door swept open, and Aria felt the temperature in the lobby seem to drop several degrees. Marcus Blackthorne strode in like he owned the world, which in many ways he did. He was taller than she'd expected, easily 6'4", with jet black hair and sharp features that belonged on a magazine cover rather than in a boardroom. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, emphasizing broad shoulders and a powerful frame that spoke of strength beyond his business acumen, but it was his presence that truly took Aria's breath away. He moved with the confident grace of a predator, and everyone in the lobby seemed to automatically step aside to create a path for him. The very air around him seemed charged with an energy that made Aria's skin tingle with awareness. "Miss Chen," Marcus's deep voice addressed the receptionist, and Aria shivered at the rich baritone that seemed to vibrate through her chest. "I need the Morrison files sent to my office immediately, and where are the quarterly reports from the analytics department?" Aria's blood turned to ice. Those were her reports, the ones currently clutched in her trembling hands. She was supposed to have delivered them an hour ago, but she'd been procrastinating, hoping to avoid this exact scenario. "I believe Miss Rosewood from Analytics has them, sir," Jessica replied, her voice carefully professional. "Aria, could you come here, please?" Every instinct Aria possessed screamed at her to run. She could slip out the back exit, claim she'd been in the bathroom, anything to avoid facing those legendary green eyes. But her feet seemed rooted to the marble floor, and she found herself stepping out from behind the plant, like a deer caught in headlights. Marcus turned toward her, and Aria's world tilted on its axis. His eyes were even more intense than the rumors suggested, a deep emerald green that seemed to see straight through to her soul. When his gaze found hers, she felt something electric pass between them, a recognition that made no logical sense, but felt undeniably real. "Miss Rosewood," Marcus said, her name rolling off his tongue in a way that made her stomach flutter with unexpected warmth. "I believe you have something for me." Aria opened her mouth to respond, but only managed a small squeak. Her hands shook as she held out the reports, and she could feel heat creeping up her neck and into her cheeks. This was exactly why she avoided situations like this. She turned into a trembling mess around powerful people. Marcus stepped closer to accept the reports, and Aria caught his scent, something masculine and intoxicating that made her head spin. When his fingers brushed hers as he took the documents, she felt a jolt of electricity that nearly made her drop everything else she was carrying. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "These are the Morrison projections?" Aria nodded frantically, not trusting her voice. She could feel the eyes of every employee in the lobby watching this interaction, probably wondering why their intimidating CEO was being so patient with the scared little analyst who could barely string 2 words together. "Your work has been exceptional," Marcus continued, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed and protected at the same time. "I've been reviewing your analyses. Your insights into market trends are impressive." The compliment hit Aria like a physical blow. Marcus Blackthorne knew her work, had been reviewing her reports personally. She felt a surge of pride mixed with terror, pride that her work was being recognized at the highest level, terror that she was now on his radar. "Thank you, sir," Aria managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. Marcus's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been concern flickering across his features. "Are you feeling all right, Miss Rosewood? You seem nervous." Nervous was an understatement. Arya felt like she might faint, throw up, or spontaneously combust at any moment. But there was something in Marcus's tone, something unexpectedly kind, that made her look up and meet his eyes again. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice still shaky but slightly stronger. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Blackthorne." Something changed in Marcus's expression then, a warmth entering those piercing green eyes that transformed his entire face. The intimidating CEO seemed to fade away, replaced by someone who looked almost protective. "The honor is mine, Miss Rosewood," Marcus said, and Arya could have sworn she heard genuine sincerity in his voice. "I hope we'll have the opportunity to work together more closely in the future." As Marcus walked toward the elevators, Arya remained frozen in place, her heart racing and her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She'd survived her first encounter with the legendary Marcus Blackthorne, and instead of the disaster she'd expected, something extraordinary had occurred. For just a moment, when he'd looked at her with those kind eyes, Arya had felt something she'd never experienced before, a heat rising inside her that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Chapter 2. Unexpected Summons. 3 days after her encounter with Marcus Blackthorne, Arya had almost convinced herself it had been a dream. Almost. The memory of his intense green eyes and unexpectedly gentle voice kept interrupting her thoughts at the most inconvenient moments, causing her to make mistakes in her usually flawless spreadsheets and lose track of conversations with her co-workers. She was deep in concentration, analyzing market data for the upcoming quarterly presentation, when her computer chimed with an email notification. Arya glanced at the sender and nearly fell out of her chair. From Marcus to Blackthorne Industries. Com to Arya.Rosewood Blackthorne Industries. Com subject, Project Collaboration Request. Miss Rosewood, I would like to discuss a special project that would benefit from your analytical expertise. Please come to my office today at 3 p.m. Regards, Marcus Blackthorne, CEO, Blackthorne Industries. Arya stared at the email for a full minute, reading it 3 times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. Marcus Blackthorne wanted to see her, in his office, for a special project. The same Marcus Blackthorne who made seasoned executives break out in cold sweats. "Oh God," she whispered, attracting the attention of her cubicle neighbor, David. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," David said, rolling his chair over to peer at her screen. "Worse," Arya said weakly. "I've been summoned to the 35th floor. David's eyes widened. The 35th floor was executive territory, and the corner office belonged to Marcus himself. Most employees went their entire careers without setting foot up there. "What did you do?" David asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and concern. "I have no idea," Arya replied honestly. "He mentioned my work the other day, but I thought it was just polite conversation." For the next 4 hours, Arya alternated between panic and excitement. By 2:45 p.m., she had changed her outfit twice, reapplied her lip gloss 4 times, and given herself 3 different pep talks in the bathroom mirror. She settled on a conservative navy blue dress that made her feel slightly more professional and less like she was about to face a firing squad. The elevator ride to the 35th floor felt like it lasted an eternity. When the doors finally opened, Arya stepped into a world of understated luxury that took her breath away. The executive floor was all floor-to-ceiling windows, rich mahogany and artwork that probably cost more than her annual salary. "Miss Rosewood?" A sophisticated woman in her 40s approached with a warm smile. "I'm Margaret, Mr. Blackthorne's assistant. He's waiting for you in his office." Arya nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed Margaret down a hallway lined with portraits of what she assumed were company founders and major shareholders. At the end of the hall, massive double doors stood slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of the corner office beyond. Margaret knocked softly. "Mr. Blackthorne? Miss Rosewood is here. Send her in, please," came the familiar deep voice that made Arya's stomach flutter. Margaret stepped aside, gesturing for Arya to enter. "Go ahead, dear. He doesn't bite." Arya wasn't entirely convinced of that, but she squared her shoulders and walked through the doors into Marcus Blackthorne's domain. The office was stunning, a corner space with panoramic views of the city skyline, dominated by a massive desk that looked like it belonged in a museum. But it was the man behind the desk who commanded all of Arya's attention. Marcus was standing with his back to her, looking out at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd removed his suit jacket and Arya found herself momentarily distracted by the way his white dress shirt stretched across his broad shoulders. When he turned to face her, she was struck again by the sheer presence he commanded. "Miss Rosewood," Marcus said, moving around his desk with that same predatory grace she remembered. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." He gestured to a comfortable-looking chair in front of his desk, and Arya perched on the edge of it, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, to stop them from shaking. "Would you like some coffee? Water?" Marcus asked, his tone much gentler than she'd expected. "I'm fine, thank you," Arya managed, though her throat felt like the Sahara Desert. Marcus settled into his chair, leaning back slightly and studying her with those penetrating green eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Arya felt like she was being evaluated by some sophisticated piece of machinery. "Relax," Marcus said suddenly, and Arya realized she must look as terrified as she felt. "You're not in trouble, Miss Rosewood. Quite the opposite, actually." "I'm not?" Arya asked, her voice coming out smaller than she'd intended. "Definitely not," Marcus assured her, and for the first time since she'd entered his office, he smiled. The expression transformed his entire face, making him look younger and infinitely more approachable. "I asked you here because I have a proposition for you." "A proposition?" Arya repeated, her mind immediately racing with possibilities. "I'm launching a new division focused on emerging markets and sustainable technologies," Marcus explained, leaning forward slightly. "It's a project I'm personally overseeing, and I need someone with exceptional analytical skills to help me evaluate potential investments and partnerships." Arya blinked, processing this information. "You want me to work directly with you?" "I want you to lead the analytical team," Marcus corrected, and Arya felt her jaw drop. "Lead a team?" she squeaked. "Mr. Blackthorne, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm just a junior analyst. I've never led anything." Marcus's expression grew serious, and he stood up, moving around his desk to lean against it directly in front of her chair. The proximity made Arya's pulse race, but instead of feeling intimidated, she found herself drawn to his presence like a moth to flame. "Arya," Marcus said, using her first name for the first time, and the sound of it in his deep voice made her stomach flip. "May I call you Arya?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Arya, in the 6 months you've been with this company, your work has been outstanding. Your market analyses have been more accurate than those of analysts with 10 times your experience. Your insights have already influenced several major investment decisions." "They have?" Arya asked, genuinely surprised. "They have," Marcus confirmed. "But more than that, I see something in you that you don't see in yourself yet." "What's that?" Arya whispered. Marcus crouched down so they were at eye level, and Arya felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. "Fire," he said simply. "Hidden beneath all that nervousness and self-doubt, there's a fire burning in you, Arya. I can see it when you talk about your work. When you present your findings, you have passion, intelligence, and instincts that can't be taught." Arya stared at him, feeling something shift inside her chest. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, had ever seen potential in her that she couldn't see herself. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted quietly. "I do," Marcus said with absolute certainty, "and I'll be there to support you every step of the way." As Arya looked into Marcus's eyes, she felt that same heat she'd experienced in the lobby beginning to rise again, but this time it wasn't accompanied by fear. This time it felt like courage awakening, like strength she'd never known she possessed finally beginning to emerge. Maybe, just maybe, Marcus Blackthorne could see something in her that was worth believing in. "Okay," Arya said, her voice stronger than it had been since she'd entered his office. "I'll do it." Marcus's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face once again. "Excellent. We start Monday." As Arya left his office that day, she felt like she was walking on air. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her potential and believed in her capabilities, and that someone happened to be the most powerful, intimidating, and inexplicably attractive man she'd ever met. The heat rising inside her was no longer just attraction. It was ambition, confidence, and the beginning of a transformation she never could have imagined. Chapter 3. Finding Her Voice. Monday morning arrived with the force of a tidal wave. Arya stood outside the conference room on the 28th floor, clutching her laptop and a stack of research files, trying to calm her racing heart. Today was her first day leading the Sustainable Technology Analysis team, and she was about to meet the 5 senior analysts who would be reporting to her. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra she'd been using all weekend. "Marcus believes in you. You belong here." Taking a deep breath, Arya pushed open the conference room door and stepped inside. 5 faces turned toward her, 3 men and 2 women, all older than her, all with years more experience. She recognized them from company directories and hallway encounters, but she'd never imagined she'd be leading them. "Good morning, everyone," Arya said, her voice starting soft but growing stronger as she moved to the head of the conference table. "I'm Arya Rosewood, and I'll be heading up the new Emerging Markets and Sustainable Technology Division." She could see the skepticism in their eyes. After all, she was the junior analyst who'd been hiding in her cubicle 6 months ago. But something had shifted inside her over the weekend. Marcus's confidence in her abilities had planted a seed that was beginning to grow. "I know what you're thinking," Arya continued, setting down her materials and making eye contact with each team member. "6 months ago I was analyzing quarterly reports in a corner cubicle, but Mr. Blackthorne has entrusted me with this project because he believes in my vision for the future of sustainable technology investment." Robert Chen, a 15-year veteran of the company, leaned back in his chair with barely concealed doubt. "No offense, Miss Rosewood, but leading a team requires more than just analytical skills. It requires experience managing people, handling high-pressure situations, making decisions that affect millions of dollars." Instead of shrinking back as she would have a week ago, Arya felt that familiar heat rising in her chest. But this time, it wasn't embarrassment, it was determination. "You're absolutely right, Robert," Arya said, her voice steady and clear. "I don't have management experience, but I do have something else. A fresh perspective on an industry that's evolving faster than traditional approaches can keep up with." She moved to the whiteboard and began sketching a diagram. "While we've been analyzing sustainable technology as a niche market, I've identified 3 emerging trends that are going to revolutionize how we think about energy, transportation, and manufacturing within the next 5 years." For the next 30 minutes, Arya presented her vision with a passion and clarity that surprised even herself. She outlined market opportunities that the traditional analysts had missed, backed up her projections with data that painted a compelling picture of the future, and demonstrated an understanding of global trends that went far beyond her supposed experience level. "The question isn't whether I have experience," Arya concluded, turning back to face her team. "The question is whether we're going to be the company that leads this revolution or the one that gets left behind, because we were too focused on the way things have always been done." The room was silent for a moment, and Arya felt her newfound confidence waver slightly. Had she overstepped? Been too aggressive? Then Sarah Martinez, one of the senior female analysts, began to clap slowly. "That was brilliant," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "I've been watching these trends develop, but I never connected them the way you just did." One by one, the other team members began to nod in agreement. Even Robert looked impressed, despite his initial skepticism. "All right, Miss Rosewood," Robert said, a grudging respect in his tone. "You've got my attention. What do you need from us?" Arya felt a surge of triumph that was better than any drug. "I need you to help me prove that sustainable technology isn't just the future, it's the present. And we're going to be the team that shows Blackthorne Industries how to capitalize on it." As the meeting continued, Arya found herself speaking with an authority she'd never known she possessed. Ideas flowed freely, and she could see her team beginning to buy into her vision. By the time they adjourned, she had assignments delegated, timelines established, and a clear roadmap for their first major presentation to the executive board. "Impressive work, Miss Rosewood." Arya turned to find Marcus standing in the doorway, and her heart immediately began racing again. He was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, but his expression was one of unmistakable pride. "Mr. Blackthorne," Arya said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't know you were listening." "I wasn't eavesdropping," Marcus said with a slight smile. "I was walking by and heard passionate voices. I had to see what was causing such animated discussion." The team members filed out, each offering Arya encouragement as they passed. When they were alone, Marcus stepped into the conference room and closed the door behind him. "How do you feel?" he asked, moving closer to where she stood by the whiteboard. "Terrified," Arya admitted honestly, "but also exhilarated. I've never felt anything like this before." "Like what?" Marcus asked, his green eyes intent on her face. Like I actually know what I'm talking about, Arya said with a laugh that held a note of wonder. Like I belong in a leadership role. Like maybe you were right about that fire you said you saw in me. Marcus's expression grew serious, and he stepped closer until they were only a few feet apart. Arya, what you did in there, that wasn't me believing in you. That was you believing in yourself. I just gave you the opportunity to show what was already there. Arya looked up at him, struck by the intensity in his gaze. There was something different about the way he was looking at her now, something that made her pulse quicken and her skin feel sensitized. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see myself. Thank you, Marcus replied, his voice dropping to that husky tone that did strange things to her nervous system, for proving me right. For a moment, they stood there in charged silence, and Arya became acutely aware of everything about him, the way his shirt stretched across his chest, the faint scent of his cologne, the way his eyes seemed to be studying her face like he was memorizing every detail. I should let you get back to work, Marcus said finally, though he made no move to leave. Should you? Arya asked, surprised by her own boldness. Marcus's eyes flashed with something that might have been surprise or admiration, or something else entirely. Careful, Miss Rosewood. You're beginning to sound dangerously confident. Is that a bad thing? Arya asked, taking a small step closer. Quite the opposite, Marcus said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. It's exactly what I was hoping for. Chapter 4. Power Dynamics. 2 weeks into her new role, Arya was beginning to understand what people meant when they talked about the intoxicating nature of power. Not power over others, but the power that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged, doing exactly what you were meant to do. Her team had rallied behind her vision, and their preliminary research was exceeding even her own optimistic projections. The sustainable technology sector was exploding with opportunities that traditional investment firms were completely overlooking, and Blackthorn Industries was positioned to be the first major player to recognize the shift. More significantly, Arya was discovering sides of herself she'd never known existed. The shy, trembling analyst who had hidden behind potted plants was still there, but she was now balanced by someone confident, articulate, and surprisingly comfortable with taking charge. The lithium extraction technology alone could revolutionize battery production, Arya was explaining to the executive board, her voice clear and commanding as she gestured to the projection screen behind her. If we invest now, before the major players catch on, we could corner the market on the most efficient extraction process currently in development. She could feel Marcus's eyes on her from where he sat at the head of the conference table, but instead of making her nervous, his attention felt like a source of strength. Over the past 2 weeks, they'd been working closely together, often staying late to review research and discuss strategy. What had started as a professional mentorship was evolving into something more complex, more charged with an undercurrent of attraction that neither of them had acknowledged directly, but both were intensely aware of. "What's the risk assessment on this investment?" asked Victoria Sterling, the chief financial officer, her sharp eyes focused on Arya with the intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. 6 months ago, a direct question from Victoria Sterling would have reduced Arya to stammering incoherence. Now, she met the older woman's gaze directly and smiled. "Moderate to low risk with exponential upside potential," Arya replied confidently. "The technology has been tested successfully in 3 different applications, and the company has patents pending in 12 countries. The primary risk is that we don't move fast enough and lose the opportunity to a competitor." "And you're confident in these projections?" Victoria pressed, clearly testing Arya's resolve. "I'm confident enough to stake my career on them," Arya said without hesitation, and she was surprised to realize she meant it completely. A murmur of approval went around the conference table, and Arya caught Marcus's slight nod of satisfaction. When the presentation concluded and the board members began filing out, Victoria approached Arya directly. "Impressive work, Miss Rosewood," the CFO said, extending her hand. "I look forward to seeing how this division develops under your leadership." As Victoria left, Arya felt a hand touch her lower back gently. She turned to find Marcus standing behind her, his expression warm with pride and something else that made her stomach flutter. "Walk with me," Marcus said softly, and Arya fell into step beside him as they left the boardroom. They walked in comfortable silence down the executive hallway toward Marcus's office, but instead of going inside, He led her to a small balcony that overlooked the city. The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, and for a moment they simply stood side by side, watching the bustling streets far below. "You were magnificent in there," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying a note of something that sounded almost like awe. "I felt magnificent," Arya admitted, turning to face him. "Is that strange? 6 months ago I would have been terrified to speak in front of that many senior executives." "It's not strange at all," Marcus said, turning to mirror her position so they were facing each other. "You're discovering who you really are when you're not limited by fear and self-doubt." "Who am I?" Arya asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Marcus studied her face, his green eyes intense in the golden light. "You're brilliant, passionate, and stronger than you ever imagined. You're someone who sees possibilities where others see obstacles. You're—" He paused, something shifting in his expression. "You're extraordinary." The way he said the last word made Arya's breath catch. There was something different in his tone, something personal that went beyond professional admiration. "Marcus," she said softly, using his first name deliberately for the first time outside of her own thoughts. His eyes flashed at the sound of his name on her lips, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with electricity. They were standing close enough that Arya could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Arya," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need you to know that what's happening between us, it's not because you work for me. It's not because of any power dynamic or professional obligation." "What is it because of?" Arya asked, her heart racing as she looked up at him. "It's because you're the most fascinating woman I've ever met," Marcus said, reaching up to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because watching you discover your own strength has been the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. Because somewhere between that first day in the lobby and right now, I've fallen completely and utterly in love with you." Arya's world tilted on its axis. Marcus Blackthorne, powerful, intimidating, larger-than-life Marcus Blackthorne, was in love with her. Not with some idealized version of who she could become, but with who she was right now, in this moment. "I love you too," Arya said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "I think I have since that first day, when you looked at me like I was worth seeing." Marcus's hand cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing across her cheek. "You were always worth seeing, Arya. You just needed to believe it yourself." As the sun set behind them, casting the city in twilight, Marcus leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, but when Arya responded by rising on her toes and threading her fingers through his hair, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home and embarking on an adventure all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Arya felt that familiar heat rising in her chest. But this time, she recognized it for what it truly was. Not fear or embarrassment, but power. The power of knowing exactly who she was and what she wanted. "So what happens now?" Arya asked, her voice steady and confident. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "Now we change the world. Together." As they stood on the balcony overlooking the city they were about to conquer, Arya realized that the trembling girl who had hidden behind potted plants was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew her own worth, who embraced her own strength, and who was ready to take on anything life had to offer. The heat had risen, and she was ready to burn bright. Chapter 5. Navigating New Territory. 3 weeks after their balcony confession, Arya was discovering that being in love with your CEO while leading a high-profile division came with its own unique set of challenges. She and Marcus had agreed to keep their relationship private until her division proved itself, but maintaining professional boundaries when all she wanted was to lose herself in his arms was proving more difficult than any market analysis she'd ever attempted. "The Jakarta proposal needs revisions," Marcus was saying during their Monday morning strategy meeting, his tone carefully professional despite the way his eyes lingered on her lips. "The government's stability concerns need more detailed analysis. I'll have Sarah dive deeper into the political risk assessment," Arya replied, making notes on her tablet while trying to ignore the way his presence made her skin feel electrified. "We should have updated projections by Wednesday." They were alone in his office, the door closed for what appeared to be a routine business discussion, but the air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with sustainable technology investments. "Arya," Marcus said softly, abandoning all pretense of discussing business as he moved around his desk toward her. "We agreed," Arya said, though her voice lacked conviction as he approached. "Professional boundaries during work hours." "It's barely 7 a.m., Marcus pointed out, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne. "Most of the building is empty." "Marcus," Arya warned, but she made no move to step away when he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm finding it increasingly difficult to focus on quarterly projections when all I can think about is how beautiful you look when you're passionate about something," Marcus murmured, his thumb tracing along her jawline. Before Arya could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. Marcus glanced at it and immediately stepped back, his expression shifting to business mode so quickly it left her breathless. "Victoria's on her way up," he said, straightening his tie. "She wants to discuss the Jakarta proposal." Arya quickly moved back to her chair, grateful for her newfound confidence that allowed her to compose herself quickly. By the time Victoria Sterling knocked on the door, both she and Marcus looked perfectly professional. "Good morning," Victoria said as she entered, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with the calculating gaze that had made her one of the most feared executives in the building. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just reviewing the Southeast Asia projections," Arya replied smoothly, holding up her tablet as evidence. "We were discussing the political risk factors in the Jakarta proposal." Victoria's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she took a seat across from Arya. "That's actually why I'm here. The board has some concerns about expanding into politically unstable regions." For the next hour, Arya found herself defending her research with a passion that surprised even her. She presented detailed analyses of government structures, economic indicators, and risk mitigation strategies that demonstrated not just her analytical skills, but her deep understanding of global market dynamics. "The instability you're concerned about is actually an opportunity," Arya concluded, her voice confident and persuasive. "Companies that enter these markets early with proper risk management position themselves to benefit enormously when stability returns. And our data suggests that stability is coming sooner than most analysts predict." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying Arya with an expression that was impossible to read. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Impressive work, Miss Rosewood. I can see why Marcus has such confidence in your abilities." There was something in the way Victoria said it that made Arya's stomach clench with sudden worry. After Victoria left, Arya found herself alone with Marcus again, but the mood had shifted. The passionate tension from earlier was replaced by something more complicated. "She knows," Arya said quietly, not really making it a question. "Victoria suspects everything," Marcus replied, moving to look out his window at the city below. "It's what makes her such an effective CFO. The question is whether she'll use that suspicion against us." "Against us? Or against me?" Arya asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her chest since Victoria's pointed comment. Marcus turned to face her, his expression serious. "Arya, I need you to understand something. What we have is real, and it has nothing to do with your professional success. But there will be people who try to diminish your achievements by suggesting otherwise." "I know," Arya said, though the words felt heavy with implication. I've worked so hard to prove myself. I don't want people to think I earned this position on my back instead of with my brain." The crude phrase hung in the air between them, and Marcus's expression darkened with something that might have been anger. "Anyone who suggests that doesn't know you," Marcus said fiercely. "Your work speaks for itself, Arya. Your team respects you because you've earned it. The board approved your proposals because they're brilliant, not because of any personal relationship." "But will they continue to see it that way once our relationship becomes public?" Arya asked, voicing the question that had been keeping her awake at night. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Arya could see him weighing his words carefully. "There will be challenges," he admitted finally. "But Arya, you're not the same person who trembled in the lobby 6 months ago. You're strong enough to handle whatever comes." "What if I'm not?" Arya asked quietly. "What if this destroys everything I've built?" Instead of offering empty reassurances, Marcus moved closer and took her hands in his. "Then we'll build something even better," he said simply. "Together." Chapter 6. The Test of Fire. The test came sooner than either of them expected. Friday morning, Arya arrived at the office to find an email that made her blood run cold. From anonymous subject, "Interesting office dynamics. Miss Rosewood, Some people might find it interesting to learn about the late-night meetings and private dinners between our CEO and his newest division head. I wonder what the board would think about the real reasons behind your rapid promotion." A concerned colleague, Arya, stared at the email, her hands shaking as she read it 3 times. Someone was watching them, documenting their relationship and threatening to use it against her. Everything she'd built, everything she'd worked for could be destroyed by office gossip and innuendo. "Arya," Sarah Martinez appeared at her cubicle. Arya had insisted on keeping her original workspace rather than moving to a fancy office, saying it kept her grounded. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I might have," Arya said quietly, then made a decision that surprised herself. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Honestly?" "Of course. Do you think I earned my position?" "Honestly. Not because you work for me now, but because you've seen my work. Do you think I deserve to be leading this division?" Sarah looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Arya, are you serious? You've revolutionized how we approach emerging markets. Your Jakarta proposal alone is going to net the company millions. Of course you earned this position. Why would you even question that?" Before Arya could answer, her phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen and she noticed it was his personal cell, not the office line. "We need to talk," Marcus said without preamble when she answered. "My office. Now." Arya's stomach dropped. He'd received a similar email, or worse, the anonymous sender had already gone to the board. "I'll be right there," Arya said, ending the call and turning to Sarah. "I need to handle something. Can you manage the team meeting this afternoon if I'm not back?" "Of course," Sarah said, concern evident in her voice. "Arya, is everything okay?" "I hope so," Arya replied honestly. The elevator ride to the 35th floor felt like ascending to her own execution. When she entered Marcus's office, she found him pacing behind his desk, his jaw tight with tension. "You got one too," he said, looking up as she entered. "Anonymous email threatening to expose our relationship," Arya confirmed, closing the door behind her. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." "This isn't your fault," Marcus said firmly, "and I'll be damned if I let some coward with a grudge destroy what we've built, professionally or personally." "What do you mean?" Arya asked, though something in his tone made her pulse quicken with anticipation rather than fear. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "I mean, I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of pretending that loving you is something to be ashamed of. I'm tired of letting other people's opinions dictate how we live our lives." "Marcus, think about what you're saying," Arya said, though her heart was racing with excitement at his words. "If we go public now, under these circumstances, it will look like we're admitting guilt." "Guilt for what?" Marcus asked, moving around his desk to stand in front of her. "For falling in love? For finding someone who challenges us, supports us, makes us better than we were alone? If that's guilt, then I'll wear it proudly." Arya looked up at him, seeing the determination in his green eyes, and felt that familiar heat rising in her chest. But this time, it wasn't just confidence or attraction. It was courage. The courage to stop apologizing for who she was and what she'd accomplished. "What are you proposing?" Arya asked. "I'm proposing that we call an emergency board meeting," Marcus said, his voice steady with resolve. "I'm proposing that we present your latest quarterly projections, show them exactly how successful your division has become, and then announce our relationship ourselves, on our terms." "That's incredibly risky," Arya said, though she could feel her own determination growing to match his. "The best investments always are," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "The question is, are you willing to bet on us?" Arya thought about the scared, trembling woman who had hidden behind potted plants just 6 months ago. That woman would have run, would have ended the relationship to protect her career, would have chosen safety over love. But that woman was gone. "Let's do it," Arya said, her voice strong and clear. "Let's show them exactly who we are and what we're capable of." Marcus's smile was brilliant as he pulled her into his arms. "God, I love your courage," he murmured against her lips before kissing her deeply. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, but their eyes were bright with determination. "The board meeting is at 2, Marcus said. "Are you ready to change everything?" Arya thought about her team, her work, the incredible life she'd built through her own talent and determination. She thought about Marcus, who had seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself. Most of all, she thought about the fire burning inside her chest, the heat that had transformed her from victim to victor. "I was born ready," Arya said, and for the first time in her life she meant it completely. The trembling was over. The real Aria Rosewood was about to make her debut, and she was going to be magnificent. Chapter 7. The Board Meeting. At exactly 2 p.m., Aria walked into the executive boardroom with her head held high and her presentation materials organized with military precision. The emergency board meeting had drawn all 12 members, their faces ranging from curious to concerned as they settled into their leather chairs around the imposing mahogany table. Victoria Sterling sat to Marcus's right, her expression unreadable but her eyes sharp with anticipation. Aria could practically feel the woman's calculating gaze assessing every detail of her appearance, looking for signs of weakness or guilt. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire, "thank you for accommodating this emergency session. Before we address the reason for this meeting, I'd like Miss Rosewood to present her latest quarterly projections for the Sustainable Technology Division." Aria stood, her movements fluid and confident as she moved to the presentation screen. 6 months ago, the thought of presenting to this group would have left her a trembling mess. Now she felt the familiar heat of determination burning in her chest. "Esteemed board members," Aria began, her voice clear and commanding, "I'm pleased to report that the Sustainable Technology Division has exceeded all projected targets for the quarter." For the next 20 minutes, Aria delivered a presentation that was nothing short of masterful. Her data was impeccable, her analysis was brilliant, and her projections painted a picture of explosive growth that had several board members sitting forward in their chairs with undisguised interest. "The Jakarta expansion alone has generated 15% more revenue than our most optimistic projections," Aria continued, clicking to a slide that showed dramatic upward trending lines. "Our early entry into the market has positioned us as the primary supplier for 3 major infrastructure projects." Board member after board member asked probing questions, and Aria answered each one with expertise that demonstrated not just knowledge, but genuine mastery of her field. She could see respect growing in their eyes, recognition of the value she'd brought to the company. "In summary," Aria concluded, "the Sustainable Technology Division has generated $42 million in revenue this quarter, with projections suggesting we'll reach $60 million by year-end. We're not just meeting expectations, we're redefining what's possible in this sector." The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. Even Victoria Sterling was nodding with what looked like grudging admiration. "Exceptional work, Miss Rosewood," said board member Thomas Hartwell, the company's longest-serving director. "Your division has become one of our most profitable ventures in record time." "Thank you," Aria replied, but instead of returning to her seat, she remained standing. "However, that's not the only reason Mr. Blackthorne called this meeting." A subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. The board members exchanged glances, clearly sensing that something significant was about to happen. Marcus stood, moving to stand beside Aria, with a gesture that was unmistakably supportive. "Ladies and gentlemen, I called this meeting because it has come to our attention that there are rumors circulating about Miss Rosewood's rapid advancement and the reasons behind it." Victoria Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained carefully neutral. "Rather than allow speculation and gossip to undermine either Miss Rosewood's professional achievements or this company's integrity," Marcus continued, "we've decided to address the situation directly." Aria felt her heart racing, but her voice was steady when she spoke. 6 months ago, Mr. Blackthorne offered me a leadership position based solely on my analytical work and strategic insights. That professional relationship has since evolved into a personal one. The silence in the room was deafening. Aria could see various board members processing this information, their expressions ranging from surprise to calculation. "I want to be absolutely clear," Aria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that my professional achievements stand entirely on their own merit. The results I've just presented speak for themselves. My relationship with Mr. Blackthorne began after I'd already proven my capabilities, not as a means to advancement." Thomas Hartwell was the first to speak. "Miss Rosewood, are you saying that you and Mr. Blackthorne are romantically involved?" "I am," Aria replied without hesitation, "and I'm saying that this relationship in no way compromises my professional judgment or the integrity of my work." Victoria Sterling leaned forward, her expression sharp. "This puts the company in a potentially compromising position. Office relationships between executives can create liability issues, conflicts of interest, and workplace drama that affects productivity. You're absolutely right, Marcus said, surprising everyone in the room, which is why I'll be recusing myself from any decisions regarding Miss Rosewood's division going forward. Her performance reviews will be conducted by you, Victoria, and any advancement decisions will be made by the board as a whole. Arya felt a surge of love and admiration for Marcus. He was willing to remove himself from her professional oversight to protect both her integrity and the company's interests. Furthermore, Arya added, her voice ringing with conviction, I welcome that scrutiny. I want my work evaluated by people who have no personal investment in my success. I want to earn every promotion, every accolade, every dollar of revenue through demonstrated excellence. Board member Catherine Walsh, one of only 2 other women on the board, spoke up. Miss Rosewood, I have to ask, are you prepared for the increased scrutiny this revelation will bring? There will be people who question every decision you make, every success you achieve. Arya met Catherine's gaze directly, her expression fierce with determination. Ma'am, with respect, people have been questioning my place in this company since the day I was hired. The difference is that now I know my own worth, and I have the results to prove it. The question before us, Thomas Hartwell said slowly, is whether this relationship represents a conflict of interest that damages the company, or simply a personal matter between 2 consenting adults. I'd like to address that, Victoria Sterling said, and Arya felt her stomach clench with anticipation. This was the moment that would determine everything. Victoria stood, her expression serious as she looked around the table. I've been watching Miss Rosewood's work closely since she assumed leadership of the Sustainable Technology Division. I've questioned her decisions, challenged her projections, and scrutinized every aspect of her performance. Arya held her breath, waiting for the verdict that would either vindicate or destroy her. And I can state unequivocally, Victoria continued, that Miss Rosewood has earned every bit of success she's achieved. Her work is exemplary, her leadership is inspiring, and her results speak for themselves. Any suggestion that she advanced through personal relationships rather than professional merit is not just wrong, it's insulting to one of the most talented executives this company has ever employed. The words hit Arya like a physical blow of relief and vindication. Victoria Sterling, the company's most feared and respected executive, had just publicly endorsed her abilities. I move that we accept Miss Rosewood's disclosure, implement the oversight changes Mr. Blackthorne has suggested, and continue to support the Sustainable Technology Division under her exceptional leadership, Victoria concluded. Seconded, said Thomas Hartwell immediately. One by one, the board members voiced their agreement. By the time the vote was called, it was unanimous. Chapter 8. Rising Heat. Later that evening, Arya stood in Marcus's penthouse apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below through floor-to-ceiling windows. The emergency board meeting felt like something from another lifetime, though it had only been a few hours since she'd walked out of that boardroom with her head held high and her future secure. Any regrets? Marcus asked, appearing behind her with 2 glasses of champagne. Arya turned to face him, accepting the champagne with a smile that felt like it came from her soul. Only that I spent so many years being afraid of my own shadow. To rising heat, Marcus said, raising his glass in a toast. To rising heat, Arya echoed, clinking her glass against his. They drank, but neither moved away. The attraction that had been simmering between them for months was now free to burn openly, and Arya could feel it in every nerve ending. The anonymous emailer tried to reach out again this afternoon, Marcus said quietly. Apparently they wanted to know if we were interested in negotiating. Let me guess, Arya said, with a confidence that surprised herself. You told them where they could shove their blackmail attempt. Marcus's laugh was rich and warm. Actually, I forwarded their information to our legal department and HR. Turns out it was Bradley Morrison from accounting. He was apparently hoping to leverage our relationship into a promotion for himself. How did that work out for him? Arya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. He's currently cleaning out his desk, Marcus replied. Amazing how quickly bullies fold when you refuse to be intimidated. Arya set down her champagne glass and moved closer to Marcus, her eyes never leaving his. I'm done being intimidated by anyone or anything. I can see that, Marcus said, his voice dropping to that husky tone that made her pulse race. God, Arya, watching you in that boardroom today, Seeing you stand up for yourself, defend your work, claim your place, it was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. You know what the most incredible part was? Arya asked, reaching up to loosen his tie. What? Marcus asked, his breathing becoming uneven as her fingers worked at the silk. Realizing that I didn't need you to save me, Arya said, her voice soft but filled with strength. I needed you to help me save myself. There's a difference. Marcus's hands came up to frame her face, his eyes intense with emotion. You're magnificent, Arya Rosewood, absolutely magnificent. So are you, Marcus Blackthorn, Arya replied, standing on her toes to brush her lips against his. And now we don't have to hide it anymore. The kiss that followed was different from all the others they'd shared. It was free of secrecy, uncertainty and fear. It was a kiss between equals, between partners who had chosen each other not out of need or convenience, but out of recognition of something extraordinary. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Arya felt like she was glowing from the inside out. So what happens now? Arya asked, echoing the question she'd posed months earlier, but this time without any trace of uncertainty. Now, Marcus said, his eyes blazing with love and admiration, we build the life we want, together, as equals, as partners in every sense of the word. I like the sound of that, Arya said, pulling him down for another kiss. As the city sparkled below them, and the heat between them built to an intensity that promised to burn bright for years to come, Arya reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a trembling, invisible analyst to a confident, successful executive who had found love with a man who saw her true worth. It seemed impossible that so much could change in such a short time. But she had learned that transformation wasn't about time. It was about courage. The courage to let yourself be seen, to claim your place in the world, to refuse to accept less than you deserved. The tiny woman who had once trembled before the Alpha was gone forever. In her place stood someone who had discovered that the most powerful heat of all came from within, the fire of knowing exactly who you were, and being brave enough to show the world. As Marcus lifted her into his arms and carried her toward their future, Arya smiled with the confidence of a woman who had found her strength, claimed her power, and discovered that the greatest love of all was the one that helped you become exactly who you were meant to be. The heat had risen, and it would never be extinguished again. Chapter 9. Building an Empire. 6 months after the board meeting that changed everything, Arya stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new corner office on the 32nd floor, watching the morning sun paint the city in golden hues. The Sustainable Technology Division had expanded beyond anyone's wildest projections, now occupying an entire floor and employing over 50 people across 3 countries. Her desk was covered with proposals from international partners, acquisition offers from major corporations, and invitations to speak at conferences around the world. The trembling analyst who had once hidden behind potted plants was now being called one of the most innovative minds in sustainable technology investment. Knock, knock, came a familiar voice from her doorway. Arya turned to see Sarah Martinez, now her deputy director, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a grin that suggested good news. Please tell me the Soul deal went through, Arya said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Better than that, Sarah replied, settling into one of the comfortable chairs Arya had chosen for her office, furniture that encouraged conversation rather than intimidation. They want to fast-track the entire project, full implementation by the end of the year, with an option to expand into 5 additional cities. Arya felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came with each victory, but it was tempered now with the wisdom that success was a journey, not a destination. What's the catch? There's always a catch. They want you to personally oversee the transition, Sarah said. 3 months in Seoul, working directly with their Government Technology Council. Arya raised an eyebrow. A year ago, the thought of traveling internationally for work would have terrified her. Now it felt like an exciting challenge. What did you tell them? That I'd have to check with the boss, Sarah grinned. But Arya, this is huge. This could establish us as the premier sustainable technology consultancy in Asia. Before Arya could respond, her office phone buzzed with the distinctive ring that indicated a call from the executive floor. She glanced at the caller ID and smiled. Mr. Blackthorn, she answered in her most professional tone, though she couldn't keep the warmth entirely out of her voice. Miss Rosewood, Marcus replied, matching her formal tone despite the amusement she could hear underneath. I was wondering if you might have time in your schedule for a business lunch today. That depends, Arya said, winking at Sarah, who was trying not to laugh. What kind of business are we discussing? The kind that involves celebrating my girlfriend's latest international triumph and discussing our future expansion plans, Marcus said, abandoning the pretense. Sarah already filled me in on Seoul. Congratulations. Thank you, Arya said, her heart warming at the pride in his voice. Even after all these months, Marcus's belief in her abilities never failed to make her feel like she could conquer the world. Lunch sounds perfect. After ending the call, Arya turned back to Sarah. Tell Seoul yes, but I want full autonomy on implementation strategy, and I want you to come with me as project coordinator. Sarah's eyes widened. Arya, are you serious? You'd trust me with something that big? Sarah, you've been instrumental in every major success this division has had, Arya said firmly. Besides, someone once told me that the best leaders are the ones who surround themselves with people smarter than they are. You're definitely smarter than me when it comes to international logistics. As Sarah left to make the necessary calls, Arya reflected on how much her definition of strength had evolved. 6 months ago, she'd thought strength meant having all the answers, being perfect, never showing vulnerability. Now she understood that true strength meant knowing when to rely on others, when to admit uncertainty, and when to trust in the capabilities of her team. Her computer chimed with an email that made her smile. It was from Jenny, her former coffee shop friend, who was now pursuing her MBA with a focus on sustainable business practices. Arya saw the article about you in Forbes. The quiet revolutionary who's changing how we think about clean energy investment. I'm so proud of you. Remember when you used to order your coffee with an extra shot just to have enough caffeine courage to face the day? Now you're the one giving other people courage. Can't wait to work for your company someday. Jenny, Arya typed back quickly. Jenny, you won't be working for my company. You'll be working with my company. There's a difference. Can't wait to have you on the team. Arya. The distinction was important to her. Arya had learned that the best organizations weren't hierarchies where power flowed downward, but communities where everyone contributed their unique strengths toward a common goal. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Meeting running long. Rain check on lunch? I'll make it up to you with dinner at that little Italian place you love. Arya smiled, typing back. No problem. I have a conference call with Tokyo anyway. See you tonight. As she prepared for her international call, Arya caught her reflection in the window and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Not because she looked different physically, though confidence had given her a radiance that hadn't been there before, but because of the way she carried herself. There was no apology in her posture, no attempt to make herself smaller or less noticeable. The woman in the reflection stood tall, spoke with authority, and took up exactly as much space as she deserved. Chapter 10. The Perfect Heat. 1 year later, Arya stood on the terrace of Marcus's penthouse, but this time she wasn't alone. The space had been transformed for an intimate engagement party, with soft lighting, elegant flowers, and about 30 of their closest friends and colleagues celebrating the next chapter of their story. The ring on her finger caught the moonlight, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that Marcus had chosen because it reminds me of the fire in your eyes when you're passionate about something. The proposal had come during a business trip to Singapore, after Arya had successfully closed the largest sustainable technology deal in the company's history. You know, Marcus had said as they walked along the harbor at sunset, when I first saw you in that lobby, I thought you were beautiful, but I had no idea I was looking at the woman who would change not just my life, but the entire trajectory of sustainable technology investment. Is that your idea of a romantic speech? Arya had teased, though her heart was racing. No, Marcus had replied, dropping to one knee right there on the pier. This is Arya Rosewood. You've taught me that the best partnerships aren't about one person leading and the other following. They're about two people challenging each other to become the best versions of themselves. Will you marry me? Now, surrounded by the people who had supported their journey, Arya felt that familiar heat in her chest, not the nervous energy of her old insecurities, but the confident warmth of a woman who knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. Speech, speech, called out Robert Chen, who had become one of Arya's strongest supporters and closest advisors. Oh no, Arya laughed, but she moved to the center of the terrace anyway. You all know I'm much better with quarterly projections than I am with emotional speeches. "That's not true anymore," Sarah called out. "You gave an amazing speech at the Global Climate Summit last month." Arya smiled, remembering the conference where she'd addressed an audience of 2,000 environmental leaders and government officials. The shy analyst who once couldn't speak up in meetings had delivered a keynote address that received a standing ovation and resulted in 3 new major partnership offers. "All right," Arya said, raising her champagne glass. "A year and a half ago, I was a woman who thought she had to make herself smaller to succeed, who believed that asking for what she wanted was somehow wrong, who trembled at the thought of being noticed." She found Marcus in the crowd, his green eyes warm with love and admiration. "Then I met a man who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, not because he wanted to rescue me, but because he wanted to challenge me to become who I was always meant to be." The crowd made appreciative sounds, but Arya held up her hand. "But the most important thing I learned is that the heat that transforms us, the fire that makes us who we're meant to be, doesn't come from someone else. It comes from within. It comes from the courage to stop apologizing for taking up space, to stop dimming our light to make others comfortable, to stop settling for less than we deserve." Victoria Sterling, who had become an unexpected mentor and friend, nodded approvingly from where she stood with her husband. "So here's to rising heat," Arya continued, her voice strong and clear. "Here's to the fire that burns away everything that doesn't serve us and leaves behind everything that does. Here's to love that challenges us to grow, work that fulfills us, and the courage to keep rising no matter who tries to keep us small." The toast was enthusiastic, but as the party continued around them, Marcus pulled Arya aside to a quiet corner of the terrace. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question that had become something of a tradition between them. "Only that it took me so long to stop being afraid of my own power," Arya replied, sliding her arms around his neck. "And now?" Marcus asked, pulling her closer. "Now I'm ready for whatever comes next," Arya said confidently. "The soul expansion, the European partnerships, maybe even that crazy idea about starting our own consultancy firm." "Mrs. Blackthorne, CEO," Marcus mused. "I like the sound of that." "Co-CEO," Arya corrected with a smile. "Equal partners, remember?" "Equal partners," Marcus agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like champagne and felt like coming home. As the party continued around them and the city sparkled below, Arya reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her here. From a trembling woman who hid from her own potential to a confident leader who was changing an entire industry, the transformation seemed almost magical. But she knew it wasn't magic. It was choice. The choice to stop accepting less than she deserved. The choice to bet on herself. The choice to let the heat rise instead of trying to contain it. The tiny Omega who had once trembled before the Alpha was gone forever, replaced by a woman who understood that true power came not from dominance or fear, but from the courage to be authentically, unapologetically yourself. And as Marcus held her close under the starlight, Arya knew that the best was yet to come. The heat had risen, the fire was burning bright, and she was ready to light up the world.